So I want to introduce to you what is called the triple pass reading strategy. It may be something that you're already familiar with or that you've kind of figured out yourself. The focus with this triple pass reading strategy is discovering information, understanding information, and remembering information. I find it works best with shorter articles simply because of the time constraints. So it may not work so well with a book, but practice it with the shorter articles that you're assigned with for your week-to-week readings in seminar. And as you get the hang of it and kind of figure out how it works for you, then you can apply it and experiment with it and personalize it as well for longer works. So I'm just going to talk you through what the triple pass reading strategy involves, and then in a following video I'm going to take you through my reading strategy of a slightly longer assigned reading. So the first time, as the name suggests, we're going to read this 3 times, and our first time is going to be focusing on discovery. So we're not just starting with the first word and reading every word is equally important right to the end. We're going to flip through the reading and we're going to discover what it's about. So we're going to look at those high information content areas that we've already talked about, maybe kind of skim the first line of paragraphs or sections just to see how they're building the argument. And we're going to identify and mark some of that key information as soon as we see it. So where's the thesis? What is the question that they're answering or digging into, or the problem that they're trying to solve? It may be 1 or 2 concise sentences, or it may be a little more loosely worded and maybe 3 or 4 or 5 sentences. So we just want to mark that. And as we think about marking things in our text, we want to use highlighting carefully because we don't want to end up with a page that is completely full of yellow highlighter, because at that point it's not very useful. So use different colors of highlighting, and then also think about what you're highlighting. Maybe highlight keywords and not entire sentences, so that those key ideas really pop out at you. Sometimes if it's an entire paragraph, I just draw a line in the margin, like a highlighter line in the margin, and that indicates to me that this whole paragraph is really important and I don't get overwhelmed with a big block of yellow or orange or whatever color I'm using. So we want to identify and mark what is the author trying to do with this piece and what methods or sources are they using. And you'll learn more about methods and sources in your discipline as you progress in your university career. We want to identify quickly the structure of the article, a markup section. So sometimes you're really lucky and an article or a book chapter has headings. Sometimes they just kind of have section breaks where there's a bit of a gap in the text, or there's like a little fancy symbol. You want to look for those things. You want to look for some keywords as you're skimming those first lines of the paragraphs. Words like first, second, finally are really useful to identifying that development of the argument. And you want to be thinking about questions that you're going to look to answer during your second reading. Okay, so what are some of the big questions that you need to answer based on that initial skim through? So it's really important. This first phase, we're just skimming through it quickly. We're not going to spend a lot of time on this first read through, and we're not reading carefully, because that is coming in our second read through, where we are reading through to understand. And this is the bulk of your time reading an article, is reading to understand. We're looking for some of those details. We're trying to understand what are the author's key points. You really want to focus here. We've read the introduction and the conclusion, so we've got an idea of the argument. And now we're going to focus on the beginnings and endings of chapters and paragraphs. Those are going to be really information-rich places for us as well. And we're looking to answer the questions that came up that we asked ourselves when we skimmed through it. And here's where you're going to really be marking up your text, but you don't want to get bogged down into specific details. So there may be a lot of detail that is not as relevant to those bigger questions that you're trying to answer. So going back to that question, why are we reading this particular article? And if there are things that you're not sure if they're important or not, you can just mark them in the margin and then come back to them if you need to in a seminar discussion, or ask about them. And this is really useful, I find, for things like dates and numbers and figures and that kind of really intense information that may not be as useful in a seminar discussion. But if I know where it is in the text, then I can find it really quickly and bring it up if I need to. And then our third pass through, again, we're not spending as much time with this one. This is a way to remember and also to review it before seminar so that it's fresh in our minds for discussion. So after we've done that in-depth, more in-depth and more intense reading, to kind of go through and make some notes on it in our own words. I like to do this in the margins. Some people do this on a separate page or in a separate file. And we're going to sum up in our own words some of that key information that we have identified. Especially if you're making your notes on a separate document or on your computer, mark down what page and what paragraph that information is in. It's good practice. It's for your research when you will need to provide citations, and it helps you out in seminar that you can quickly find the section of the article or the assigned reading.